What's up, guys? It is Modern Craftsman Monday.
Monday.
Listen,
Monday. Sorry.
That's okay. I thought you were done. But you kept going. First and foremost, we are back to our normal recordings. We're gonna alpha test that other software again before going cold turkey off this one. Yeah, going live with it. This week we have Ted Benson from Benson Homes and Unity Homes. If you guys don't know who this guy is, you should look him up. Basically found out that he brought timber framing back after being dead for 100+ years. But we talk about a lot, and John says he almost teared up at one point.
I saw him.
That's not going to get anyone to listen.
He was getting weepy.
It might.
He's good, man. I think we'll have him on again for sure.
Or we're going to tease that at the end. Now that everyone knows.
Forget it. Just no one listens to me anyways.
Yeah, he's not coming back on.
He might.
One and done.
Stay tuned. Guys, this podcast is brought to you by Duration Moulding and Millwork. How long do you expect your build to last? Let's face it, if you're cladding your build with fiber cement siding, do you really expect it to go the long haul? Have you ever even thought about how someone will have to prep that material for the next coat of paint? Get the look of wood with a product that wears like iron and will last as long as the rest of your build. To learn more about Duration Polyash products, please visit their website at durationmillwork.com.
I just got it delivered to my job site.
Did you?
Duration?
Yeah. Yep. I had it. It was spec'd for AZAC, and I made a substitution. Had to ask the architect and everything for approval, and it got approved, and we're putting it up.
That's nice. Trim?
Yeah. It's
you guys were painting the AZAC anyway?
Correct. I just I wasn't going to be comfortable with it opening up and all that stuff with how much sun it's going to get.
I feel like once anyone starts painting PVC too, it's like it really defeats the purpose of it for me. So now it's just rot resistant, but it moves a ton, and there's so many issues with painting it.
Yeah, I like the fact we made the move, so it'll be going up next week, I think. And I'm gonna plug the YouTube. I know you're the YouTube king with 1 million views last month. I have I think I have like 400 views last month. But Benny's on there.
Yeah. How often are you guys gonna release?
I think it's 3 times a month is our goal.
Nice. That's a great start.
So we'll have 2 series going, maybe 3, depending on when our Beacon Hill one launches, because we're underpinning that brownstone and everything else. So we'll see. We're trying it out. Just trying to find time management. I don't know how you do it, Nick. But trying to put it all together and launch them all. So right now, Raise the Roof Reno in Charlestown, Bunker Hill. Charlestown is live.
Go check it out, guy.
Basically, I'm a hermit, or I've been a hermit for a year, and
yeah, you haven't
left the house much. Almost 1 year anniversary right now.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
We I forget. I feel like I might have been talking to a Derek last year, and I had talked to you at one point about coming up to visit, and we were going to do the podcast up there, and there was chatter that we were going to do it last spring, and obviously that changed. So here we are a year later. We finally get you on, but I still definitely want to come up there and check out the shop.
Oh yeah, you should. And when it's safe to do it.
Yeah. How's work been for you guys?
Good. Yeah, actually really good.
Yeah.
And we're, part of the reason I'm home is everybody who can stay at home is at home, and that allows us to work pretty safely for those who, need to get into the facilities to work and spread out that way. But
so this is your home shop?
Really productive through all of this. And part of it has to do with, having really good protocols as a company and being real strict. And so people feel safe.
Yeah. How big is the company now?
About 130.
Yeah.
135.
What would you attribute to having, what are your strict protocols when you say something like that?
Oh, well, this has to do with COVID.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
you're
But,
not,
I mean,
you're
that-
not in the age demographic, right?
yeah. So for
Cleared
instance,
it by a mile.
when in the production facilities, when people, are working, usually they would share tools,
Mm,
and with all of this going on, they don't share tools, and they wipe down when they get in and they wipe down when they leave. And it's kind of their personal little work pod area. And so, that helps people to feel safer. And there's a whole cleanup routine before and after. And we do not have any visitors whatsoever.
sure.
So, and then traveling, we are still putting buildings up on a regular basis, but we're not mixing crews.
Right.
Normally we would like to work with local crews and, get that local general contractor, connected to our crew. But with all of this going on, we don't know if their protocols are the same as our protocols. So we're not doing that. And that obviously has an effect on production, because, normally we might be sending out two people or even one person, and now it's 4 or 5.
Right.
Kind of going as a team.
Is that something that you just kind of adapted your pricing towards? I'm sure that with what you guys do, pricing is day to day at this point, but to kind of integrate those processes into what you guys are doing?
Well, in a lot of cases, we just took a beating, because we had already established the price, and we didn't, we didn't adjust it for COVID. But, for the new contracts, we've included, some consideration of that. And also, of course, some of the price increases having to do with commodities going up. And I'm sure you've been, all about that.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's the price increases are insane, but then I feel like with an operation like you have, there's so much work that has to be done to keep that many people safe. I feel like with a smaller company, it's way more manageable, where you have a kind of core group of people who are around each other. But with that many people, it's so hard to control what everyone's doing when they leave work, and you really have to isolate everyone at work.
Yeah. But with a large company, we also, have a staff that is focused on that.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that I'm working from home, every morning I fill out a health assessment, along with everyone else. And, the fact that I'm working from home and I plan to makes it pretty short. But for instance, if I had dinner out last night, and, that went into the health assessment, then there would be 10 follow-up questions, as a part
What'd you have for dinner? How was it cooked?
Who were you with? Were you masked? And so, we have a really good team, and they've been right on it for everyone. So, for example, I just saw an email a few minutes ago from, one of our staff, asking about visiting his girlfriend this weekend. And, what are the protocols about he's going to New Jersey to visit his girlfriend?
God, Jersey girl. Jeez, just fire him. Let him go. I don't know if there's got to be some sort of protocol for that.
Yeah, right.
We're going to have to let you go. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah. Well, what he was told is he has to quarantine.
Yeah, that's tough.
So that's a harsh thing to tell her. If I visit you, I've got to quarantine.
Right. So Ted, going back a year, obviously it sounds like you put this stuff into place, but how fast was this implemented?
Oh man, like overnight. It was unbelievable. You
realized the severity of it, and you said, probably there was either, hey, we either need to adapt or we're shutting down.
Did you guys shut down at all?
No.
That's good.
Yeah.
No. But we have, part of the reason I'm a fortunate guy is, we have really good leadership around the company.
Mm-hmm.
We have a great CFO and COO and, leaders in all of the shops and all of the production areas, and, leader of the engineering team, and the project management team. And so, they took the reins on this. I set a standard. I said, this is serious and we've got to take it seriously.
Right.
But, everybody was with me on that and took the reins and established a prevention task force. It'll be it was March 9th. So next Tuesday, it'll be a year that, we established a prevention task force on this, and the protocols, hit hard immediately and actually relaxed a little bit, after a month or so. We started harsh and then as we learned more, it got a little bit looser.
Yeah.
Hey, that's actually something I want to dig into is your leadership, the leadership of your company, because, I know a little bit about your background, and for those who are listening, why don't we pause for a second and just kind of hear about what, how you got into this industry, because I can only assume that it's grown since you started.
Well, it's a little bit of a story, but
we get time.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure you have that much time, but to get into it a little bit, like many of you, I think, I started out just, as a carpenter, just working my way through school and high school and college. And so I had some experience and skills, and I didn't intend to be a carpenter builder. That wasn't an ambition, partially because, where I learned was in Colorado, kind of in the suburban areas outside of Colorado Springs and Fort Collins. And that wasn't the best carpentry going on in the world. There's,
sure.
I don't know if you've heard the term before, but Colorado carpenter, that's derisive.
Okay. I'm going to look that up.
Yeah. Yeah. Look that up for sure.
It's rustic.
Yeah. And, and I have to say, some of my early experiences, particularly in high school, I think I learned more about swearing than I did about carpentry skills.
Sure.
That was sort of like the seedy side of humanity. And
is that
and so, I really
up?
didn't intend to, become a carpenter, a builder. But when I got to the East Coast, with the intention of finishing college on the East Coast, things were really different. And, right there outside of Boston and Concord and Carlisle and Lexington and that area, there were some really good carpenters and, real good craftsmen. And it was, a real eye opener for me. And I got enchanted with it, by the culture of it and the skills, that I didn't have and they did, and the attitude that they had, which was really impressive, as well. And so, when I kind of made my way into, the carpentry and building world, I had my Colorado experiences as context, and then this inspiration, from the Concord Carlisle area. And, it's like, why couldn't all buildings be like that? Why couldn't all carpenters have that kind of attitude? And my initial interest was to find a better way to build. And, with the idea that, if we practiced a method that was challenging and inspiring in itself, then the craft would be elevated and the product would be elevated. So my first inspiration was to revive timber framing as a building method. I hadn't seen it in Colorado.
This was early in your career?
Yeah, that was the first thing in my career. And I was introduced to timber framing in Concord, were beautiful timber frames, built like furniture. And I talked to these old carpenters, my age, back then, right? And it's like, why did we give up this craft? Clearly, it was an inspiring way to build. And, at that time, and I think now, Concord today is still defined by those old buildings,
right.
those old timber frame buildings. And so is Lexington and much of Carlisle and, a lot of the towns, out in that area, Weston. And it's like, why did we give this up if it's such an enduring, sustainable, timeless way to build? And the old carpenters, response was because it was too time consuming and impractical. That's why we didn't give it. And my idealistic, youthful response was, well, why don't we apply modern technology and, bring it into the 20th century?
Okay.
Maybe we can make it practical again. And so that was my early, motivation, and is what, got our business started.
How old were you at this time?
25, 26.
So was your early carpentry experience, were those just summer college jobs?
Yeah, in high school and college, yes. Yep.
So you, like you said, you didn't really anticipate getting into that field. It was just something to keep busy and make some money.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think, that, back then, if you could swing a 32-ounce hammer, you're hired. Basically we were nail guns.
Right.
Before the time. So I was young and strong and, I could swing a 32-ounce hammer and I could drive a 16 penny, in 2 blows, that you're hired. That's pretty much a skill you needed.
and that transition from coming from out west and then back to this area, was it immediate where you were you fell in love with what you were doing at that point?
Yeah, but for some specific reasons.
Yeah.
I was actually an English major, and that's I was going to college for journalism and writing and literature, and that was my background. And at the time when I was got to the East Coast and I was trying to earn the money to get back to school, I think you can appreciate that moving from an in-state school at Colorado State University, I've forgotten what the tuition was, but I could earn it in a summer. And I was trying to get into Harvard, and, it was going to take me a year and a half, to earn enough money to,
that's a big difference.
That's
a way bigger. I feel like that difference is much bigger now. Have you ever looked into it? I feel
way bigger now. Yeah, it was actually within the realm of possibility back then, but it was still, a year or so of work, to earn that tuition. So at the time, I was auditing classes just to stay current and keep my academic capabilities, up a little bit. And one of the lead carpenters who was really inspiring, his name was Oliver Chase, probably still inspiring to some people out in that area.
That's a good carpenter name.
Yeah, definitely. Oliver.
Yeah, I feel like if you want to be a carpenter, that should be your name. Or if that was like a carpenter in a movie, he'd be Oliver Chase.
Yeah, and he's got that good Boston accent, so it goes with that as well. But so Oliver, was also kind of a Renaissance man, and on a lunch break, he could teach you how to, lay out an octagon with a framing square, or quote a Yeats poem that was one of his favorites. And so, for me, that was school, right? That was school. That was an education. And here at the same time, I was auditing, some pretty boring classes. And, I said, this is a lot more interesting than that. And, Oliver's going to retire. school's always going to be there. So, let me have this education. I don't have to pay for it. It actually pays me. So I stuck with that, as long as I could. And through that group of carpenters, I got a job working on a project here in Walpole, New Hampshire. And that's what brought me up to the New Hampshire area. But I found some of the same things here, the legacy of timber frame buildings in Walpole, New Hampshire, which is just like Concord, Massachusetts. And, it's defined by its old timber frame buildings. And so, the inspiration stuck with me. But then I had a little more time and I started studying timber frames, which is really mostly barns because they were open and you could see the joinery and understand it. So I studied the barns around here and doing renovation work. I was in old buildings pretty often.
So when you say studied, you were just in them, dissecting them, taking them apart and understanding it, or were you?
No, really trying to understand it. I actually got that initial interest from Oliver, because, we were looking at old buildings in the Concord area, and Oliver actually knew how they were built. He had some of the old tools and so we'd go into there and he would tell me about the bents and the bays and the value of the braces and how they actually fashion the joinery. And he could see, how it was built by the organization of the structure. And so, when I was up here on my own, it was like, okay, it's a 4-bent barn, just like, one of those I saw. And, it has common rafters or it has mid plates. And so it's just interesting to see the different, structural styles and kind of understand the joinery and maybe how it was fashioned. But then, you can imagine, so here's this kid, running around the area, this kid from Colorado, running around the area, knocking on doors. Can I look at your barn? Sure.
I've thought about doing that like on a daily basis, just on houses.
But eventually, somebody said, yeah, sure. And do you want it? And so lo and behold, I actually had a few barns to dismantle. And
so you learned a lot from taking them apart.
Yeah.
You just looked around. Did you have, I was gonna say, do you have some of the reclaimed pieces in this place?
Right over here. I'm in the original woodworking shop in Alstead. And a lot of the timbers here were, came from those old barns.
So going back to Concord, when you were working with Oliver, that you were working for another company as a carpenter, is that right?
Well, on projects in that area with them and, with a friend in the area who was sort of related to Oliver, or related to a guy who was related to Oliver.
So but you were working for someone, and then when you went up to Walpole, was that for yourself, or was that?
No, I was working for
someone else.
Yeah, for someone else. He was building a big house here in Walpole, and to organize a crew, and so I joined a crew. Turned out to be, that whole story turned out to be not all that it was made out to be. When I was hired, like he had assembled the best group of carpenters on the East Coast, so he said, and I was like, wow, I'd love to join that crew. Just pay me whatever I'm worth, just to have the experience. And there was a little bit of alcohol and
sure.
Some of the things involved, and it wasn't the inspiring experience that actually I had, with the guys in the Concord area.
So
carpentry, but it led to work around this area, and pretty soon, I was working for myself. not by plan, but just because I met people and they knew I was a carpenter and, so do you want to do this dirty job? Nobody else does.
So carpentry aside, when you decided to make the leap from Colorado State to Harvard, what was the reason for that? Because I mean, that's a big jump on many many levels.
Yeah, I'm not sure your listeners are ready for this.
Uh-oh, maybe. I feel like they've heard a lot.
Yeah. I actually told a little bit of the story in a blog I wrote. But when I was at Colorado State, I was very involved in race relations, and those were heady times, back then. This was 67, 68, 69, and there was a lot of things going on. I was in the middle of it, and one thing led to another. I eventually got arrested for reasons I'm still proud of, not embarrassed about.
That's good. That's important to distinguish that.
Yeah. And so it meant I really needed to find a new college because I actually wasn't welcome at that one. So,
really? That's crazy.
Yeah. But
I feel like especially
again, going back, it was something I got involved with because I believed in it, and we actually made a difference in what we were trying to do. And so
it's funny. I feel like everyone thinks that Colorado is this extremely progressive state, and you think of the colleges there, and everyone's kind of loose and hippies and all this stuff, but it's a very, very like conservative white state for the most part, which you wouldn't realize. And yeah. I'm sure especially even more so back then, but I feel like everyone bases their perception of the state on the schools and that mindset, but it's not necessarily like that all over the state.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
Well, I'm glad that we figured that out. I think everyone's ready for it, though. They'll be able to handle it.
Yeah, well, to go step back just a little bit, I actually went out for the football team. I was a pretty good football player in high school, and decided to play at CSU, and I had a good chance of doing that. My skills were okay. But one of the things I discovered was that football wasn't as fun at that level.
Yeah.
And it was pretty demanding at that level. They didn't want me to major in English, for instance. That was too academic. And I was meeting, although the school, Colorado State University at the time, was about 13,000, almost 14,000 students. I was meeting pretty much all the Blacks on campus. They were either on the football team or on the basketball team. And so that was actually my inspiration to get involved and to correct something that I didn't think was right.
So I went to see
but that's not what this podcast is about.
No, I went to see you Boulder for like a year. And it was probably 2006. 2007, maybe 2006, and that was still the case. Like the only Black people who were on campus were the athletes, like the basketball team and the football team, and the rest of it was just like white kids who were there to ski. Which was like not how I anticipated it to be, which was one of the many reasons where I was like, I got to get the heck out of here. But it not much has changed.
So now you have a clue about how idealistic and unrealistic I was, because I decided to fix that.
Yeah, that's a big order.
Right. So yeah, it was kind of a tall order. And it was the same thing about timber framing, some years later, to decide that I was going to revive, timber framing as a building method was pretty idealistic and naive.
Yeah, but I feel like you may not have as many people who are adamantly as against that as the other topic. You may not have as many supporters, but I don't think you're going to have people who are going to fight you tooth and nail on that one. Like, all right, go waste your time.
Yeah, the way they were fighting for, the first, I don't know, 10 years was the unwillingness to actually pay for the labor involved.
Yeah.
It took a while to kind of establish the value
but it sounds like, being 26 years old, that was something you realized early on, is that, and I've heard you talk about this on some of your videos, but you realize that the reason that people weren't doing timber framing was the cost of the labor and the time to put into it. And you immediately reacted to that, saying, then why don't we make it, why don't we innovate around that and make it easier to fabricate?
Exactly.
And that's like, to have that immediate thought at 26 years old, working for another company, and then fast forward to however old you are today, to think that has now shaped you. You've done a house in 49 out of the 50 states, right? Have you hit 50 yet?
Yeah, all of them.
All of them. Yeah. So it's like to be to grow that company. I think that's, sticking to your guns and really setting a course for something that otherwise was probably, going to go away, faster than you were able to bring it back.
What was the last state? Colorado?
Oklahoma.
That's right.
He's not coming back. Don't let him in.
Yeah, Oklahoma. Colorado's been great. Just because I have so many friends out there and so many connections. So we've done a lot of projects around Colorado. Happy to say, including a wonderful sculpture, I guess you'd call it, on the 5th floor of the Denver Public Library. That is one of my favorite projects.
That's cool.
But over the years, what I'm most proud of is, the company that we've developed and the way in which we've evolved, and the fact that, we really didn't just stay stuck in the original ambition, but we've always been trying to evolve and develop and improve at all levels, at the craft level, at the business level, at the culture level.
Yeah, that goes back to, what we started talking about, and before we kind of introduced who you were, but you immediately started talking about leadership, and, how leadership stepped in and handled COVID in a manner that set you guys up for, really success. So why don't we dig into that as far as, going from 26 years old to moving to Walpole, New Hampshire, to then building this company. Again, you probably didn't have a CFO and a COO then. It was a period of time before you got there, but obviously you valued the leadership in the very beginning.
Yeah, one of the things I've always valued is finding and working with people whose skills are better than me, and so I guess the joke is that's not too hard. But over the years, we just have had really incredible timber frame craftsmen and woodworking craftsmen and really good carpenters. And I have to say that most of them are better than I ever became, because I just I kind of went toward the business and developing other aspects of it, and there were so many other people here whose skills just far surpass mine, pretty quickly. But I'm also real proud of that. And early on, in the company, I was an architect, I was an engineer, I was a crafts person, I was a salesperson. But eventually we got real architects and real engineers and dedicated craftspeople, and it's been really inspiring to work with this group of people and have the ability to communicate at all levels. I'm still allowed in the woodworking shop and the timber frame shop, and the engineers don't not listen when I say something. but there's experience and skills that are definitely better than mine, and that's how you grow a company.
Yeah.
And good leaders create leaders, and I know that that's what we've done really well. And it's not just me at this point.
Sure.
A lot of our leaders have been creating new leaders, and that's the story of the company.
What was it? Go ahead.
When you first started, though, what did the company look like? Because, like, as Nick had said, you're going to be wearing a lot of hats. And I always find that it's interesting to kind of hear where you took the company, especially with somebody within quote unquote residential construction, because, you're in a niche sector there, but to be able to grow a company to the size you did in residential construction, I think that it's tough. So it's interesting to hear kind of where you were, what your goals were, and like how you kind of saw yourself getting there.
Well, early on, as we transitioned, to becoming, a full-time timber frame building company, the real focus was on developing the skills. And I can tell you, there was a period of 6 or 8 years where I think the whole group of us, first me, but then 3, 4, 5, 6 other people, we were just, passionate about, getting it right and doing it efficiently, and, solving problems that had come up. And so that was really the story of, the first few years, is how to, make a product that is viable in the marketplace and, has a reason for being, has a reason to compete with conventional construction. We weren't stick framing.
Yeah.
Starting in 1974 and 75.
So you knew early on that you wanted to somehow bring this to market at a more affordable level because you knew that it was just too much time. Was your vision always that, hey, we need to be able to get this into a shop to be able to lower the cost?
Yes. Yeah.
So from day one, you were putting things in place as to how you can make that. Because again, that's a lofty goal to at this, it's not 2021. To think, hey, we're going to start doing timber framing in a shop and then bringing it, assembling it in the field. At that point, if it's 1974, you said, that's almost 50 years ago at this point. That's pretty intense to think about that. I feel like a lot of people probably would have told you to take a hike.
Yeah, they did.
You may have been better off going up against the race wars. It may have been easier.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're right about that. The first thing I did is built this shop, and I built it out of the salvage from barns. From the barns I'd taken down, and silos and other structures. I didn't have any money, so it had to be all salvage materials. But the first thing was this woodworking shop that I'm in right now, and that was kind of the beginning of a timber frame. It didn't have a lot of good joinery in it, the first one, this one, but it, was a timber structure. And then the next one we built here. And part of the whole idea was to use stationary tools, for instance, to make mortises and, radial arm saws, drill presses, and things like that you couldn't easily do on a work site. But, we could set up a system here in this shop where, we could bring an overhead drill press over a timber and drill a series of holes with a Forstner bit and then fashion a mortise pretty efficiently. That was the beginning idea. And then we had to buy big skill saws to make the tenons. But it was much more practical in the shop, to be working on the timbers, mortising, chiseling, big Forstner bit, actively working. And so it actually made a whole lot of sense to me. And the first timber frame was actually not a full timber frame, not a working timber frame. It was a timber frame structure to look like a French, kind of an old French style building inside a stick frame building that I had built. So the first mortise and tenon actually didn't hold anything up, but that was good practice, and it was probably smart to do it that way. And then the next one was a full on, oak timber frame, with all the joinery and a big house, and it was 40 miles away. And
yeah, at what point were you doing this work in your shop and all of a sudden you're like, I have to get this to site? Like, we have to move this now out of the shop.
Yeah. We have
you ever
to
get done building a cabinet where you're like, whoa, this is way bigger than I thought it was going to be. Now we have to get this inside the house.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And then we actually can't put this up. We need a crane.
Yeah.
Once we assemble this structure, on the deck, what is about to be lifted, no human being or, group of human beings is going to be able to do that. So, on the first project, we were really learning a whole methodology, including, how to assemble large sections of timbers and how to lift it and, crane signals, all of that.
Yeah.
That's just, it's crazy to think that all of this is just happening on a whim. It's like, I'm going to build a shop. I'm going to build this house. I'm going to build this house inside this shop. I'm going to take the next project, which is 40 miles away, and I'm going to take the risk of building it again in my shop. And then we'll figure out how to tell the crane guy to go up or down and side and left to right and just going for it. Is this still working for someone else, or at this point are these your projects?
Yeah, these are our projects.
So you keep saying we and our. Did you go into the business with Oliver?
I love that about him.
No, they're just me.
It was just you.
Well, that's not fair. So I started the business in 1972.
Okay.
And it was with my brother, Stephen, who came out from Colorado and joined me here. And at the time, this was just after Concord and all of that. And this other project in Walpole. And I had a project to do. So I called Stephen, to come out and help. And this was just a renovation project, a pretty big renovation project. It was the first one. And so Stephen came out and we joined forces, and he helped me take down some barns, and I, delivered my passion about reviving timber frame buildings and how wonderful these old barns were and how miraculous wooden joinery was, and, kind of all that. So Stephen was my partner and brother and, friend, and he was a part of this mission. We're going to build timber frames someday. And so Stephen died in a automobile accident in 1974. So it was just a couple of years there, and they were, really special, special years, special time. And, he helped take down every one of these timbers around me right here. He was not a part of building this workshop that happened, the summer after he died. And so, with the loss of Stephen, I just became like double dedicated to the mission because it was something we were doing together. And,
yeah,
it was a dream we both had, so that kind of deepened the mission and kind of no turning back. And, when you've buried your brother here, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
So I was here and here for good, and the mission just, couldn't fail. There was no plan B after that. So,
burn the ships,
that part of it, but it maybe that's a little bit important.
No, I think it's massively important to the story. Yeah. You know, that where you end up residing and building the business means a lot. And obviously, yeah. You know, if it was you and your brother's dream to do this, and you know, he passes away, you know, early in this, I can see why you kind of doubled down on it. Yeah. And you know, I think you alluded to it. You know, going back to the timber framing, that was your focus, but you were still. It sounds like you were still doing renovation projects. You know,
well, at first, that was what we had to do. That, you know, that's how we earned money.
Right. You'd market the timber, but you were doing renovations to keep the lights on.
Yeah. But then after that first full timber frame, in the end of 1974 and 75, you know, then we had orders, and there was more timber frames to do. We were in it full time pretty quickly.
Did you post it on social media? How'd you get all that work?
Well, it was the first timber frame to go up in New Hampshire, they said, you know, for almost 100 years.
What?
You know, that was the Concord Monitor wrote an article about it. You know, this timber frame went up in Deering, New Hampshire, and so it got a lot of publicity. And you know, this was right on the cusp of the bicentennial era, and so there was a lot of kind of fervor about, you know, kind of nostalgic era in the country's history. And so timber framing kind of had, you know, became a little bit of a thing. And the fact that we were reviving it, you know, became
a thing.
And so we had more orders. And, you know, those led to other projects. And pretty soon I had a little advertisement in the Boston Globe. So, and I was going to home shows to, you know, show off the timber framing. So it took off. And from 1975, we didn't go back to renovations. You know, we didn't need to, you know, go back to renovations. It was, you know, full on timber framing. But the other thing that happened, you know, say between 75 and, you know, 78, 79, we were doing, you know, one project after another. We were right here in Alstead, New Hampshire, and, you know, really excited about what we were doing. But we also realized it wasn't going anywhere. You know, this idea of reviving the craft and bringing it into the 20th century was a cool thing that we were doing, but it wasn't a revival. Mm-hmm. It was just us. And so that kind of spawned the idea that we really needed a lot of people to do this. You know, we needed to kind of spread the mission about the revival of timber framing and the craft of timber framing and the viability of bringing it into the 20th century. And so I told you I was an English major. I decided to write a book. And so in 1978, 79, you know, I wrote a book about timber framing. It was, you know, in many ways premature. You know, I didn't have that much experience, you know, to write a whole book on the subject, but it was really more of an invitation to others to join the craft. And that book really did take off, did really, really well from the outset. And I've written, you know, 3 other books. That's still the best-selling book today. And it did help to lead to, you know, the revival of timber framing. And then, you know, I started meeting other people who were also interested in it or doing it. And in particular, one fellow, his name is Ed Levin from up in the Hanover, New Hampshire area. And Ed and I became good friends. He was also thinking the same thing and, you know, trying the same thing and developing ideas around how to timber frame in the 20th century. But eventually, Ed and myself and some other people, Jack Soban, and others, founded the Timber Framers Guild of North America, and that got started in 1984. And that really did lead to the revival, when after the establishment of the guild and that first book of mine and then some other publications, timber framing did take off and is still alive and well today. And the guild is very, very active even today.
So
kind of look that, did lead to something, really quite good. And again, I was kind of there at the beginning, but there are so many other people now who have taken over and are leading it. And, the craft is at a really high level in this country. Not due to me. I played a role early on, but there are a lot of other people who played a good role as well.
So like looking back, being in Concord and coming across this timber frame and questioning, why don't we build this way anymore, into an immediate fascination for it, to fast forward, you basically bring timber framing back to the way we construct today, very quickly. And, I'm looking at your book here online, and then to put together this guild, the book in that, you could have easily taken that as, this is just going to be for me. I'm going to be the timber frame guy, which in short, you are. But at the time, you wrote this book because you wanted timber framing to come back nationwide. You wanted it to be more than Walpole, New Hampshire. You wanted this to be, let's get everyone back on board with this and really revive it.
Yeah, I really wanted it to be a practical way of building that anybody in the country could get one. Mm-hmm. And that would only happen if timber framing was practiced everywhere in the country. And I think essentially we did achieve that.
Is it from a marketing standpoint as well? Like, did you guys know that you had to expand out of the area?
Yeah, for sure. And, one good thing about timber framing just in general, because of the fact that we do fashion, and this leads to another subject that we should get to, but because of the fact that, timber framing is something that all timber framers that I know of are generally practicing in a controlled work environment, mm-hmm. like a workshop. Because of that, you're really, once you've fashioned the timbers, you're putting them on a truck and taking them to a site. And, there's a pretty good argument that it doesn't matter whether the site is 50 miles or 500 miles or 1,000 miles.
Still traveling.
It's a little longer, but it's actually relatively practical to, take it a little farther. And that's really why we've built in every state. It's actually relatively practical to ship unassembled timbers, on a truck, take them somewhere and then assemble something big. So that's what's taken us, all over the country, into Canada and England and even Japan, that, they ship pretty easily.
That's a long drive.
Yeah, right.
If you think about it, though, I've never thought about it that way. But in the grand scheme of a job, if you're building an entire house, so to speak, you can drive across the country in 3 days. That's not that much to add to any job. It's not like you have an entire workforce driving that. You have a couple of trucks driving. I feel like it wouldn't actually increase the cost that much.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so we're early on, we were going to some pretty beautiful places in Montana and Wyoming and Colorado, and some places that were, relatively hard to get to, but completely practical, with an unassembled timber frame to be assembled on that site.
And you guys were doing the assembly early on as well?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's definitely a part of the craft.
Yeah.
The method of assembling and raising is kind of critical to the craft, actually. But that leads to something else. A very big part of the craft of timber framing is the logistics involved and the organization involved to fashion the individual timbers, so perfectly and so well without pre-assembling them, that when you take them to a site and you insert slot A into tab B or vice versa, you get a fine fit. And that's the discipline of timber framing, and there's a lot of skill and thought and organization that goes into developing that skill. And alternately, if you had to assemble it, you actually lost the efficiency of it, right?
Right.
And so it was really sort of a practical, it was an important milestone for the business to be practical, that you needed to be able to do that work independent of pre-assembly and get that work done in a way that when you go to the site 1,000 miles away, you're going to get a fine fit.
How are you accounting for that, being that your joinery's in a shop in a conditioned space, and then it's getting on a truck and traveling across the country in a completely different environment, possibly getting rained on and everything else?
Well, we control the rained on part of it.
Okay.
That's not allowed. but actually shrinkage could come into play.
It's always a problem.
Yeah, that could be an issue. And so we do account for that, especially in greenish timber. So you would understand the moisture content here, and you would understand the moisture content there, at the other end, and try to account for it. And the big thing is not actually, the shrinkage in itself, which you can account for, but differential shrinkage. And so we do all kinds of things to avoid differential shrinkage, and always have, as a part of the timber frame discipline. So we don't do, for instance, early on, we don't do the equivalent of platform framing.
Yeah.
Kind of do the equivalent of balloon framing instead to help control that. But that whole story about the precision and the discipline, of the craft and getting a fine, furniture-like fit in timbers, didn't happen overnight, right? It took us a long time, and there were lots of years of kerfing that joint, to get it a little tighter and kind of doing it the wrong way before we did it, in a really good way. But that discipline is now the same discipline that we use now that we're building full building shells, right? And so the offsite fabrication capability that we learned through timber framing has really earned us back kind of in spades, in making high quality, tight buildings that are panelized. Because the precision and that discipline of precision is actually the same thing, right? In a timber frame joint, you're looking for a 32nd of an inch or less. And then, when we panelize a building, we're looking for airtight. We're looking for 0.6 at 50 pascals. And, a lot of the discipline between those two extremes are actually the same discipline. So when our timber framers became panelizers, they were really good panelizers,
Interesting.
Almost from day one.
So that first one that you timber framed, we're talking about kind of current day where, everything wasn't assembled. And that's actually something I never even considered. I guess I always considered, everything is test fit and then it goes out to site and gets put back together. But so that first one that you built in the shop that you're sitting in right now, when it showed up on site, did it go together?
It went together, but honestly, I had a lot of bad fits.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't plan on bad fits, but I didn't plan well enough. And so
it was just constant refinement.
Yeah, constant refinement. So the big lesson on the first one was that I didn't adequately account for squaring up the individual joinery areas, in relation to each other. I thought that, since the timbers, I had kind of squared off
the timbers,
that was going to work. It actually didn't work well enough. It, might have been torqued a little bit at the joint area. And so we had to learn actually, that there was an individual place where the joint happens that had to be mated and carefully fashioned, and kind of that area in between, the top of the post and the mid plate of the post, that could be out of square a little bit, but at the joint area, you had to get it right. And, so that was lesson on the first one. And
but I mean, that's applicable to timber.
Make sense to you guys? Yeah.
I'm thinking of cursing though. But I mean, that would be applicable to timber framing across the board, not just timber framing in a shop and then bringing it somewhere else.
Yeah.
I guess, if you were doing it all in the field, you'd be kind of accounting for that a little bit more so with each piece, being that they're going together and you can adjust them as they go. But right. I feel like you said, there's so many variables, and it's these massive pieces of wood that aren't perfectly square and twisted, and ensuring that you're getting those tight fits and accounting for potential movement is somewhat mind-blowing to me.
Yeah.
Well, it's not like
and like I was saying, we learned a lot of it the hard way. Kind of did it wrong before we did it right.
I was gonna say, it's not like having a crappy kitchen. We can order a couple of extra fillers.
Yeah.
And it is scribe and do a new scribe. You can't bring a few extra timbers and then just mill them up.
Yeah. So here's a good story about that. So that, I was talking about 1974, 75, to 84 when we founded the Guild. So that was a good long 10 years and of us teaching ourselves and learning, the hard way and figuring things out and studying old buildings and feeling like, we were learning it. In 1984, 85, through a friend, a Japanese temple builder joined us for a year. And you can only imagine, what an incredible experience that was for us, because at that point, we were now learning from somebody who had actually learned it from the master craftsman going back, 1,000 years. He had been a part of an unbroken chain of training and knowledge. And we were trying to teach ourselves, right? And so, although his language was different and he spoke no English when he joined us, our woodworking language was pretty powerful. And all of a sudden we were learning what had taken us 10 years. We were learning kind of what was right and what was wrong.
You could adopt it fairly quickly.
In the Japanese tradition, that, those large temple buildings that you see in the photos, those individual timbers are massive. And there's no way you would be able to pre-fit those joints. So everything about the discipline was getting it right, in the fashioned joinery. And in the Japanese joints, much more complex than, some of our simple mortise and tenon joints. That you're seeing those two timbers over my head here. Those are actually sample joints that Ishikawa made.
Oh, I'm looking.
It's good product placement.
Yeah.
You planned this whole conversation out.
Yeah.
Now let me move.
Yeah, right.
For the next part.
I also, I try and kind of keep in the back of my head that all of this was during a time with no internet. You don't have a massive network of people that you can rely on.
Yeah.
And to kind of bite this off and have this ambitious view, it seems insurmountable today, let alone this long ago.
Yeah. We had mail.
Yeah, I know. Ordering material and everything else. I'm like, this is insane.
We were early adopters of the fax machine.
Yeah, but I mean, even like thinking about lining up jobs out of state on the other side of the country prior to having emails and being able to send a photo to somebody, my life has never been like that. So it's tough to imagine.
It looks like I survived.
I know.
Do you think it's gotten more complicated or less complicated?
Life or timber framing?
Like the whole, let's just say, construction process from before iPhones and it was fax machines, and
I think it's much better.
Yeah.
It's much better. The communication is better always, because we have, kind of had the whole country as a marketplace. We've been trying to shrink the country, with our communication. So that's why we were early adopters of a fax machine, for instance. And what we can do today is incredible. I mean, it really is incredible that, I can have Zoom meetings at home and, share complex drawings of buildings and, the clients and the tradespeople that we're collaborating with. All of us, didn't have to travel anywhere. That's pretty impressive. So I wouldn't go back if you want to know about that.
I figured I'd ask.
Yeah. And, we were also, really trying to get into the 21st century, even back then. So in 86, we were actually writing a computer program through a friend of mine. And the computer program was about how to lay out complex timber joinery, so hip and valley type joinery, how to lay it out more easily. And, before that, we were spending almost as much time drawing the joints, as fashioning them. It was, they're that complicated. And so our first computer program kind of automatically drew the joints so that we only had the issue of laying it out on the timber. We didn't have the issue of, drawing it on paper to begin with. So that's the other story of the company, is that we've really tried to, be technology ahead. And so, writing a software program, was, a part of that, and developing a machine to make mortises more practically, was another thing that happened in the same period. We developed a machine, again, through a friend, much smarter than I am, created this machine to make mortises really accurately and really efficiently. So we were no longer using that Forstner bit, for instance, but, kind of a real slot mortiser. And then, so that was in the 80s. And then in the 90s, we were real early adopters of CNC machines, which really, again, pushed software hard, because the machine didn't know anything. It was driven by, and is driven by software. And so, in the 1990s, we really moved into the 21st century. And, that's served us well today. And, we still have that first CNC machine, but we have 3 others that are, modern updates of it. And we have a whole production line that is, dependent on CNC technology, which is, the 21st century. Here we are.
Ted, when you start adopting these things or start thinking about adopting them, is there anything internal battle about loss of the craft when you start adopting the CNC and not, that Forstner bit and, losing an arm when that thing catches the wrong way? Like, is there something about that is, pings your heart a little bit, or is it all for the greater good?
Oh, no, it definitely, grabs you and says, all right, are we losing something here? And it's actually, remains a good question. When we have really, really good craftsmen who aren't using chisels all day long. That's different.
Yeah, because it makes you think about the next generation.
Tell you, that the, craftsmen like Dennis Markham worked with us for 37 years, and he had made 10,000 mortises, I'm sure. And Dennis would tell you, I don't need to make another one.
Sure, I guess it's the modern way of delegating, right? I guess it's instead of giving it to an apprentice.
Yeah.
I guess my overall worry or that makes me twitch is that the people that program that software initially, that once that moves on and there's no need to pass it down, like let's just skip 2 generations. If that software crashes, is timber frame dead?
Yeah.
That's what I think.
No, it's a really important question. And, we definitely think about it a lot. And there's, it's real important to us that when, new timber framers come into the shop, that they do learn, the essential hand skills of timber framing. It's pretty important. And it's hard to think that you could be an accomplished timber framer without that. That
how many do you make them do?
It's something that you should be able to do also.
Is there a requirement they have to hit a quota? Certain amount of mortise and tenon joints done by hand? It's like, all right, you're good now.
Yeah, not a particular quota, but to definitely have that experience.
I think that's so important to make sure that people understand that, because if they don't, and you run it on a machine and something's not going right, or like you said, squaring up with relation to the assembly of 2 components rather than just squaring up to the one piece of wood or timber, if you don't understand all of those small tiny little details and nuances and wood grain and how this is going to expand and contract and shrink, that like putting it on a machine is no good. If you don't understand all of those tiny little things, you can ruin a lot of material very quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And, we were real lucky at the beginning, as you can imagine, that, we were timber framers were learning CNC technology, not the other way.
Yeah.
And so, they could bring their knowledge about wood and joinery, to the tool. And that was, it's really, it's important now. You've got to get, what side do you put against the fence? That still matters.
Yeah.
And, where should that joint go? So there's this whole craft that we have that we call designating. The machine can't designate, it takes humans to decide, where that timber should go and where that joint should be, and, what is strong and what isn't. And so designating is actually a part of our whole process.
Well, they got cameras for that. I got Amazon. One of my son's friend's dad basically designs these cameras they're like eyeballs. They can focus and then take a digital image of what they're looking at. So like when Amazon, there's a story, he puts it on a sidetrack. Amazon gets a shipment in of like, let's say Clorox bleach, and the container has changed, but yet you're buying a certain container on the website and it's changed. People will then push back on that. This thing takes a digital image as it comes in, like it's all robots, takes an image of it, changes the image on Amazon real time. It's insane, the technology that basically, and it has, by the package moving, it's then captured the 3D image of it. So the technology is cool. It's inevitable, I guess is my point. And it's only a matter of time, but I think your books obviously keep that tradition alive. And obviously, the guild, all those things do it. It's just, going back to your original passion, as you've been doing it this long and you've been very successful and you've evolved with the things that need to evolve in a building and in the comfort levels, I guess my biggest worry if I were you is do I do all this and then it slowly diminishes as time passes. Like, when we talk about budgets and, if I have a budget and I don't pick a builder, then you have to basically dilute something, which is probably quality. So how do you keep this going long term, without diluting the essence of what you've created?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. I think part of the answer is it's not about diluting, it's about evolving. And those are different things, because dilution means that there's this thing that exists that is now diminished and is become less viable. But if it evolves, the thing that we are building, the idea of the building that we're fashioning, actually changes with the skills and with the capabilities. So, for example, with the CNC technology, we're doing more timber work than we ever did, but it's not all solid sawn timber framing. There's a lot of kind of mass timber that we're doing, really high quality wood buildings with a little less of the, kind of traditional timber frame craftsmanship built into it. But kind of, bringing wood in larger quantities of wood into buildings is also pretty noble. It's a little different, but it's evolving kind of with the technology. So, for example, on our project list this year, we have 2 pretty large scale mass timber buildings that include, large sections of glulam timbers and CLTs and GLTs. But they're multifamily buildings or multi-use buildings. And, that's a great thing. We wouldn't have been able to do that with traditional timber framing, but we can do that, with the technology that we have. And so I'm real proud of that. I'm real proud that, we're able to advance wood buildings in this country. But I would call that more of an evolution than a dilution.
Yeah, I think evolution comes from the understanding of knowledge that's there at your hands, and dilution comes from people that don't want to put the time in to learn and to gain that knowledge, so then you lose it. And that's what we talk about all the time. We started the podcast thinking, we're going to go in and bring the trade back to every high school. And then that was like, all right, that got rubbed out pretty quick. So it's like, how do you, if no one wants to understand it, then it won't evolve. If they only see, like we talk about architects, only 1% of builds, I looked up how many permits are pulled in the United States in a year and how many are actually done with an architect. And it's ridiculous. So like we talk about that 1%, it's even higher than that what is really traditionally drawn and for you to fall in love with it is such a small percentage. So how do we affect or infect? I think that's what you've done. No one can see you, but the energy and the passion that's still with you to this day, I can only hope I still have that. And it comes across in the screen. You've infected me and I love it. But how do you infect more when the majority of people that we contact with our projects and our trades partners is only 1%? How do we spread that further so that way that not even a teenager knows what you're doing, Ted?
Yeah.
I mean, I think about like my son, if he was able to have just a second of, being in your shop and the smells and the ambiance of it, would he be infected for life? And I think more people would say yes than pushing paper in a cubicle. And how do we spread that and infect more people?
Well, you guys are on it. So what you're doing here today is actually part of the answer for sure. So thank you for that. But I think there's this whole cultural thing that we all have to work on. And I think it is a part of your podcast. And, I celebrate that. And that's this, that in our culture, and I told you about, the beginning of carpentry for me, and, learning how to swear instead of how to build. And unfortunately, there's that in our culture. We've diminished this trade by what we've done with it, by what we've allowed it to be in this country. And yet, all of us who are practitioners know this is an incredibly noble profession. We change lives. This is where people live. This is how the future is built. Homes are the stock and root of civilization. And the people who build them are a part of a very, noble tradition and a noble craft. And, it's up to us to treat it that way and, treat people that way who are, involved with that craft. I have a good story that goes along with this. So for many years, starting about 1992, up until COVID, I guess, or a few years ago, we've almost always had a intern from overseas with us. And our strongest link has been with the French compagnons. And the compagnons are, kind of an ancient apprenticeship program. It goes back, 1,500 years, and it's still strong in France. And the discipline and the skills that these guys learn in order to be practitioners of the craft is unbelievable. I mean, it's just unbelievable that, how skilled they are. They start when they're teenagers. They call them rabbits when they start, so they're 16, 17 years old. And they become a master usually in their early 30s. So this is, what is it? It's a doctorate. It's a doctorate in building. And boy, I'll tell you, those compagnons, we've had a bunch of them join us. They have those skills. And so I was traveling with one of our compagnons in France. And, a bunch of us went over to get a tour, of timber frame buildings, in the area. And so here's a compagnon who's really just a carpenter, right? And that he was a carpenter. He was building buildings. He wasn't, a master just directing other people. He was a carpenter. And on the tour, he would call ahead to where we were going, which might have been a cathedral, but definitely a church or, kind of an important public building that he wanted to show us. And he would call ahead and he would simply say, I'm a compagnon and I am touring some Americans. Can I get up into the building to show them that timber frame? They would open the doors for him, anything. And often they would want to go on the tour too, whoever he had contacted. I mean, such respect, just for the fact that he was a compagnon, a carpenter. Imagine a carpenter in this country calling somebody at the National Cathedral and saying, hey, I'm a carpenter and, I have some friends from France and I'd like to, give them a tour of the National Cathedral. They'd lock the doors. Yeah. And
it's true.
And it's so unfortunate, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's true, that, the respect for the trades is, it's a big problem. And it's obviously two-way, who are the people in the trades and how are they acting? And what are they doing on a regular basis? And then, as a public, what do we think of that trade? But, this is definitely one of the noblest professions there is, one of the most important professions there is. And, yet we don't tend to treat it that way.
Do you think that a lot of that, I mean, and I kind of know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear your opinion a little more in depth. how much of that do you think is self-inflicted from within our own industry? Because I know that a lot of people say that the public doesn't respect the trades, but I also do feel that a lot of tradespeople don't have enough dignity for themselves, and they don't necessarily demand the respect. So how much of that do you think is self-inflicted versus just society not valuing what we do?
Well, I think there is a self-infliction aspect of it, but I think what I would ask you back is, who's the self we're talking about? Is it the carpenters themselves, or is it that sector of the industry that is or isn't developing the trades? And I would say it's the latter, and that's the self-inflicted part, that the home builders across the country, the big home builders, and a lot of the industry just generally does not respect the trades. In turn, are the trades respectable? So there's this reciprocal thing going on that we desperately need to fix. And a lot of it has to do with setting better examples and ensuring that we are lifting up the trades, but the industry does not act well in that regard. I mean, just consider the what skills do you need to jump onto a framing crew? What demonstration of knowledge do you need? Nothing. Actually nothing. And an example I use is to be a barber or a beautician in this country, you have to have gone to school for over 1,000 hours in most states, and actually go to school and pay for it and pass tests and then do an apprenticeship to be a barber.
My last two barbers definitely did some. They somehow.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, Ted, this is a sensitive subject.
I've had triggered really bad haircuts lately where I'm like, they didn't put 1,000 hours in.
I gave up on it.
They had somebody forge the paperwork, or maybe they were contractors before and now they're cutting hair.
But it's true. Wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's wrong.
It's tough just because it is reciprocal, and it's almost, there's a snowball effect. And I think that it really is, it exponentially gets worse because people don't differentiate or distinguish between different types of construction, and they don't understand the quality behind it and what takes time and what goes into it. And I think that it's so price driven that people can't afford to hire people, respectable people who have to earn a certain wage, because there's not enough money to be made if your overhead's that high, until you can get into certain markets that will bear that a little bit more. But I think that for the mass majority of society in our company, they're just, I don't know if they don't appreciate enough, or they're not willing to pay for that quality. And that at that point, as a business owner, you need help. What are you supposed to do? Pay somebody a top rate so that you can deliver high quality work and just make less money? So I mean, it seems that one thing affects the other, and it's continually kind of going down this path that it's tough for people to dig themselves out of, unless, kind of like what you're doing, they can find ways to be more efficient, where they can get a decent amount of work or a quality work in place with less labor that's going into it.
Yeah, but Tyler, I think the only part missing from this is, and the people coming into our industry today, Ted started before I was even alive. No one would put that amount of time in. They would want to be successful tomorrow. They want to jump on some Gary V potion to sell baseball cards or something from some like garage sale to make money. And it's like, no one's going to put in, like, Ted, when I started in the business, I knew it would be like 10 to 15 years before I could even speak up to a point where an apprentice would be below me. You know, that's how I grew up. It's how it was going to be. I think it's a double-edged sword that the entry level is so low. The bar for entry is so low, but it's amazing that you can get in without having to do a lot. And it's really how you want to take it. And so if you get on with the right crew, that's amazing. I got lucky. I got in with a crew that mentored me and gave me as fast as I could buy tools. They were like, they saw it and they just kept throwing knowledge at me. But I know friends that got into it and they were just straight laboring for 3-4 years. And you can get broken out of this industry just as quickly as you went into it because no one knows. To Tyler's point, someone called me last week, like, yeah, I want to do this edition. I went and saw it because it was in my hometown. And I emailed them and texted them. I said, yeah, I got a referral for you. You know, this is like on Tuesday. I met them on Sunday. And I go, yeah, I got a referral for you. It's really not my, scope of work. And they got like offended. And they're like, don't worry about it. I called 10 other people. Like, we are just like, there's hundreds of us out there. No, there's not. Who are you lying to? Like, what we do, what we create, there might be 100. Okay. There might be 100, maybe in Massachusetts, because but overall, there's not that many people that take that much passion into like, Ted, I wanted to hug you when you were like, what we do is we change lives. People will make unbelievable memories in the buildings that we create, where months and years before that, they were frustrated and aggravated at, hitting their hip on the same goddamn countertop that was the wrong angle, whatever it was, Formica, or tripping on whatever it was. And then they'd flip out on their kid. And that would then carry on. And that's what I think about, is these stupid little elements in a house where if all these things trigger that when you come downstairs and mom's been cooking breakfast in a shitty kitchen that doesn't make any sense and she's frustrated, guess what? Every morning sucks because breakfast isn't fun for mom, And it's how do we fix that for people? And that's the true art and craft of it, is the artisan. And I've tried to figure out, and I hope maybe you have an answer to this, is, you said master carpenter at one point, or master something, and you said that they direct. And I've from this day, I've asked Tom Silva, I'm going to ask you, what does it take to become a master builder in your eyes?
Well, definitely a master builder has to do with more than just the skills, but it includes the skills. The skills are kind of how you get the work done. But the real master builders that I've known know why as well as how. And, the why is how you get there. The why is what makes you a master. And then the how is all about execution. So, we have some really inspiring people in our company who can talk about how to do it, but also why it's important. Why this instead of that is a better way to do it, and why it matters. And so the why, I think, separates, the real masters from, good craftspeople. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And by the way, I talked about, homes changing lives. It actually happened to me, and I think it is important in my personal story. I'm the 6th of 11. So big family, and
I would say so. Yeah.
We
6 of 11.
Yeah, right.
Like that fills a bus.
Yeah.
We watched Cheaper by the Dozen the other night.
Did you?
I was with like the girls, and I was like, this is not real. People don't have that many kids. It's just a movie.
You can't afford it.
Yeah. So my parents were incredible people. I mean, just incredible human beings, but they had other ambitions other than earning money, and so they didn't earn a lot of money. My dad didn't, but again, an incredible human being. And so we grew up with, lots of love and care and teaching, and but but money, no. And when we first moved to Colorado Springs,
I'm on the same path, if it makes you feel any better.
We lived in basically a tract house, kind of out in this new suburban area of Colorado Springs. And it was an awful building. It was a terrible, poorly built building. And it was also small. But the worst part is how poorly built it was. Do you guys know what dung board is?
Mm-mm.
That black sheathing that they used back in the 50s and 60s. It was a replacement for, actual plywood or what we now have as OSB. It was
Nick's Googling it right now.
Yeah.
Kind of tell his angle through his keyboard.
Yeah. So they, the sheathing was dung board, and, you could literally kind of put your fist through a wall if you wanted to. So anyway, we were poor and we felt poor. It was a poor quality building. It shook in the wind. And, we were crowded and uncomfortable, and the building was horrible. And we felt it. And so that was, 1948, 50, in that period, 52. In 57, my dad found a building that was scheduled for demolition in downtown Colorado Springs, and talked to the builder, and they worked out a deal, and a bunch of things happened anyway. So this old building that was scheduled for demolition eventually got moved up the street 2 or 3 miles, and backed onto a foundation. And all of a sudden, the Benson family, were living in a really high quality building, albeit, plaster fallen in, chimneys gone, and things like that. But it was a really high quality building that had been built in 1895. And we moved from poor to wealthy overnight. Needed a lot of work, so there was carpentry to do and repairing to do. So that was okay for me and my brothers. But it changed our lives. That building and the quality of it, the integrity of it, the craftsmanship in it, the feeling of it, definitely for all of us. And we still talk about it as having, had a huge impact on our life. The building itself impacted us. And, we thought the builder, whose name was Jimmy Burns, who had earned a fortune in gold in Colorado Springs, we were sure he built it for us. Of course, he had us in mind, when he built that building. And it was a blessing for us. So, lessons for me are buildings can make a difference. They do. That's where your hopes and dreams come to life or not. That's where connections are made, and your life before you comes and goes. That building is everything. But the other thing I learned from that experience is we build a lot of buildings today for wealthy people, like Jimmy Burns did, had built that original building. I think about the next occupants. I think about the Benson family that may move into that building in its next life. So, I think of the same thing, that here's this building that was built in 1895. It had its first occupants, then it became an apartment building, and then it became the Benson family moved up the street. And now there's another family living there. It'll be there 100 years from now, for sure. And the buildings we build, I think of their first occupant, really just like Jimmy Burns as having built it. But, really the important part of it is its life after that, just like 2320, as we call it.
I'm with you. I feel like when we renovate a house, I'm not into ghosts, but I do think they exist. And like the ghosts of the craftsmen before us, that we have to do our job to make this better, because what they had to put into the work that they did. Like we joke about like just putting up a lath for lath and plaster. Yeah. Imagine the two nails. Like I literally stripped down a wall when I don't do it. The demo guys do it. And I look at the wall and I'm like, I'll look to see if like there was someone that put one nail in instead of two. And man, did they always put two in? And you're like, no one just took a corner. So what? Like I then take on this burden that the craftsmen before us had to do it so much harder, that what we should do for this building is honor those guys and girls and try and do it one better with the technology we have. You know, there's no reason that I think what happens is the craft gets lost because technology gets in the way, and it's like a shiny object. It's like everyone wants the new iPhone, but no one knows why. It's like, you know, I want to learn the craft first and then implement like you did the CNC. Like there's a guy, Stephen Kearns, Architectural Openings, and he's very similar to you. He has this passion and this kind of ethos about him that just ticks on a different level, but yet you go into a shop and it's a lot of old school stuff, but then he's got the newest stuff imaginable, because I think he's compensating for the workforce that's at hand, that's at his hand. You know, is that you shouldn't diminish. I think this is actually a great point for this podcast for Nick, and that is that if you can invoke the craft in using technology, then it's for the better. But it's understanding the means and methods that can't get lost while doing so. And that's the true kind of fine line.
And I think the biggest, you know, my biggest takeaway from that, and I think about like Jeff Harvey, for example, how the guys, they swing a hammer for, I forget, a year or something without, they're not even allowed to touch the nail gun. And John, it's, you know, we've talked about it a lot. We had Cape Cod panel, and it's been I'm glad you asked the question, as, you know, to Ted, as like, do you feel as though as you innovate and evolve and adapt this, you know, technology, are we losing the craft? And of course, Ted had the perfect answer, is that no, they have to use the chisel first. And I think going back, and, you know, that was a big reason why last week we dropped the Kevin O'Connor one, because like we talked about that diagonal sheathing, and your whole point in that conversation was about understanding what the reasoning was behind it, and doing it first to understand, like using a chisel, like this is what you're trying to accomplish. Yes, I have a machine over there that can do 10 of them at the speed that you can do one, but first you need to appreciate that. And I think that could create this longevity for the craft, is if, you know, the easy thing to do would be to wipe it out. Just get rid of, hey, forget the chisels, we'll use the machine. But to your point, like, should something fail, right? And, you know, now you're at a standstill where it's all we have to do is implement. I'm saying all we have to do, but if we implement that process first, it's like, no, you gotta walk before you run.
We have to create a priority,
right? It's like, learn, like, you're gonna, like, yes, this isn't the way you're gonna always do it, but let's just, you need to appreciate that first. And I think, Ted, you're over there smiling ear to ear, but I feel as though like that's an important part to saving the craft. And, you know, I think
I feel like I always joke and say, like, how much of your job would shut down if the power went out? Like, how many people, like, let's say it's time to roof and the compressor dies. Does that roofing crew go home, or do they stick around? And there's a certain
they're going, you know, they're going home.
I know, but that wasn't always the case. And
right.
I've watched over the years.
Collated nails. You know.
I snip them. I did it the other day. My guy John pulled up and he's like, I know what you're doing. You're cutting it. I'm like, yeah, I didn't have any.
It doesn't matter.
My point is like,
do that.
How much of the industry, how much of your job, if you were to pinpoint different parts of it, just stop? Because it's not like, oh, I'll just lump the bundles up and hit them by hand, or swing the homies and grab a bucket of, you know, roofing nails. That would carry on. I brought it the same way. We hand nailed everything because my old boss, I shouldn't say old boss, my original boss, he said that, and it took me 10 years to figure it out, is that when you use a nail gun, like let's say you're roofing over felt, that you won't know when you've missed a gap in that sheathing. You know, that's how he grew up. And I was like, dude, it's plywood. What are you talking about? Like, what am I just didn't understand it. But I guess you have to first respect it, understand it in order to then know what it's all about. Otherwise, you'll never perceive it enough to appreciate it. And then it's always gone. I think it's that appreciation part I feel it's always missed. Yeah. And there's not enough people out there like Ted that have enough information to be able like it's very similar to Tom Silver, is that you've probably forgotten more than I've ever learned in this industry. And that needs to be spread out to a wider, that's why you're on the podcast, but to a wider berth, because that needs to be the people. I want people to walk away from this podcast and go, God, I thought I was passionate. I thought I had like this itch. And they go, no way. I would have to do my idea and have to deal with a fax machine. And that would turn people off. Okay. And like, you did it all. And then you created a program. Like, I could hire my kid to write code now, but like back in the day for you, that was like going to Mars. I don't know. I totally appreciate what you did, man. And what you did.
Hey, I have a thought. I could share the screen. Your listeners won't see it, but I can describe what's on the screen.
Look at you, just going over the top with technology. That's a Stallone reference, people, in case anyone listening to this.
So let's try it, right?
Go ahead.
I think this is a really cool image here.
We can pull the video and share that. Maybe we'll share this on our social.
Okay, let's see. Are you seeing my screen now?
I am. You got a lot of tabs open.
Yep.
Twice as many.
Yeah. So this picture here, this is Paul Boa. Paul is just an incredible craftsperson. And in the background here is a really just the end of a very, very sophisticated 6-axis CNC machine that can do anything, right? So it's a very sophisticated machine. On Paul's screen here, on his monitor, is the software that's actually driving the information for that machine. Mm-hmm. This is called CADWork, and Paul's very good with CADWork as well, and operates the shop. But I want you to notice his tools. Look at his chisels here. These are Japanese chisels. I can tell you they're incredibly sharp. There's a hand plane. That's the hammer that he uses with the chisels. There's a slick down here. And Paul is as good with these tools as he is with the software, the CADWork software. And obviously, if he needs to, he can drive that machine. He can run that machine too.
And they don't break the computer?
And so, to me, there's a really good image of a 21st century carpenter.
That's amazing. You're right.
Really capable with, all the hand tools. He could lay out a compound mortise and tenon joint in his sleep, by hand. He's, that kind of craftsperson. Builds beautiful furniture. Runs our Santa's workshop every year when we're kind of group building furniture. And then here's Adam. Adam is running the Weinman here. Adam is an incredibly good carpenter, and that's his background. Just a framing carpenter mostly, also capable as a finish carpenter. So he's running that panelized machine, not a machine operator trying to be a carpenter, but a carpenter really understanding, what the machine should be doing and making sure that it does that to his standards.
So Ted, with respect to these two gentlemen right here, their background was carpentry. They grew up into it, and they're, like you said, they're becoming machine operators, CAD operators. What about the kid that's 17 years old right now? With technology evolving, I think I had alluded to it, is that, if something is easier, they're going to skip the hard thing and go right to the easy thing. The kid's going to skip putting the bag on and go right to saying, I'll run the machine. I can run a machine.
Yeah. Does he buy a mouse or a chisel first?
And how do we course correct that? Where it's like, hey, oh, you want to run that machine, go be a carpenter first. But eventually
sticks around.
Yeah.
When you say that, and then they're like, what?
Yeah. But it's like eventually, giving enough time, that like those guys, like no one's going to have that opportunity to go frame houses and then come run the machine, because with enough time, it's just going to be the machine that's framing that house. Yeah. So for you, you obviously put a tremendous amount of effort into leadership and bringing the right people in, but what is your thought to that?
Well, I think a good answer to that, if I'm in some way, having founded the business, the prime fractal, if you will, but passing it on, what does Paul think about that? Paul, who would be training, the new people. Mm-hmm. And Paul's really insistent that they need to learn, the basic skills, and imbues that in, all the kind of new people or the younger people coming into the company. And they will be inspired by Paul for sure. And the other craftsmen who are at the same level. The challenge will be the generation after that. This generation, really has the benefit of the Pauls. And, the really good craftspeople that we have kind of as a part of our legacy.
I think that's what I'm getting at. It's, when Paul retires and, then the kid that he trained is now in charge of training, that, to John's point, it's like the craft is diluted a little bit. Eventually those chisels are no, they're long
on
gone.
The shelf behind you.
Right. Right. And, and they go away. It's, it's really, I think that's the biggest thing, to John, if I can speak for you, it's like, that's the biggest worry here, is that eventually that craft goes away. And the only way to hold on to what is important about the craft is still make it relevant and still make it necessary. We're never going to do it for everyone. There's always going to, the vast majority of people, in this world will always take the easy route. Will always, go the easy way. The people that are listening to this podcast and, and us and the people that have been on this podcast probably have a very different mindset, and we make up a very small percentage of this industry.
But it's growing.
And, and we, we value that. And, we're not talking about the client side of it, but it, I think, back to the beginning of this conversation, how you looked at something that was walked away from timber framing. I'm yep. speaking about, because it was difficult and it was expensive, and it just didn't make sense for the building industry anymore. To fast forward 50 years, and now it's huge in this industry, and it's, you've been able to do it in a manner that is cost effective. It still promotes craft, and we haven't even gotten into it, but you've basically built, I believe it's a second business or a second entity that is, designed around more affordable homes. And that's something that, I look at my I'm using air quotes, business plan. And it's, I want to build elaborate, really expensive, modern architecture. Like, that's my goal. Like, I want to get to that. But when I achieve that, there's a big portion of me that wants to pull myself back and put myself in a position where it's like, now taking everything I've learned from the complicated builds, how do I bring that in and make a product that is more obtainable by the masses? I don't know where I'm going with this statement. I'm sure there was a question in there, or maybe I'm just blab.
But yeah, I do want to highlight that just for your listeners. Do look at Unity Homes. I'm really, really proud of what we've been accomplishing with Unity Homes. And basically what we've done is established, kind of a platform, not with fixed building plans, but kind of with a building system that is based on building standards. So we've standardized dimensions, we've standardized positions, and that's allowed us to, think about things in a more organized way so that affordable buildings can be designed, but assembled in the design instead of, designed, from a blank screen. And it allows us to bring a really high quality buildings, at a much more affordable price. And, I think there's a real important, kind of future in there. But back to the training piece and that whole issue that we're not going to get away from, apparently. This is actually just a cultural, national problem as much as anything. In Germany, you don't have this problem. In France, you don't have this problem. In Japan, you don't have the problem. And to some extent, you have less of a problem even in Canada, where more training is required. You actually have to go to school and you have to do apprenticeship and you have to learn the basic skills. You can't not and get into the trades. You have to have done it. And a lot of the companies over in Germany and Sweden, is another place where, this exists. Also in the company have a place for apprentices so that they're learning basic skills. The CNC machines are shut off and, they're having to, on the side, go kind of back to the beginning and establish their own capability, using, basic craft skills. And it's just unfortunate that, in our country, we don't require it. We did at one point. There was a union that was really strong and good, by the way, at one point, and required a whole lot of training and discipline and,
then it got corrupted.
And, all of that. And, we've just lost some of that. And it's really unfortunate. Therefore, companies like ours have to take on, and yours, have to take on some of that ourselves. And that's a hard lift, to think that we're going to take it on for the entire industry. It should be embedded in the expectations of the industry that, the basic craft skills have been taught and learned. And now you can evolve into, another level of that craft.
It's so true. Like we talk about raising our percentages so we're more valued, but it starts right where you said in the training. If people are putting that training in and people are aware of that training that has to be met in order to do the simplest task, not just grab a piece of paper, fill out a fee and go, right then and there, you've set the precedent for it to be anyone and name the value. There's no standard there. But if you do what you just said, like France and everywhere else, then there is a value that comes along with that knowledge. Now, like my question about the master builder, I've always been stuck on it because I started that way of, becoming a laborer, becoming a, apprentice, then a carpenter, then a lead carpenter, and then keep going up to master builder. But as I got going, I don't know what happened to the industry, but I got the lead carpenter and then no one told me where to go next. And the only logical spot was me to open my own business. And I wasn't ready, but no one was also there to tell me, no, you don't know enough about this, that, and the other thing. Like Nick, you just did a quick synopsis of like your vision, but yet you want to do affordable housing. Like you're the kid going after the shiny object.
Yeah.
Like he's been doing it for 50 years and he's created it and he's mastered it in air quotes, these other pieces of the puzzle in order to achieve the next step. You can't unlock one level without, mastering the one below it. Mm-hmm. And the door just won't open. But now the door, all of them are open and anyone can be anything. And I love that, but it's like, that frustrates me that there's really like, there's no understanding of what it is. And social media has done a much better job than I think, TV in a way to portray what it takes to do what we do and have a little, the ambiance of it. But there's still nothing out there on TV that besides This Old House, which is, I know it has a huge following, but there needs to be more of that on public TV that shows what it really takes to do what we do. Like, they want to compress it. And I love that about This Old House, is that they've never jumped the shark and be like, all right, we'll condense this into, 30 minutes and we'll do the whole thing and give you that, shock and awe like every other network. They haven't done it. For better or worse, for views and no views, they've stuck to what's been true to them. And I wish more people would. And I think that's part of the issue, is that, Nick, if I told you to build those amazing houses, it's going to take 20 years to do that. Would you be cool with that?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I know I'm impatient, but I'm fine. If it takes time, it takes time. That doesn't mean I'm going to slow down and let 20 years just happen. I'm fine if it takes 20 years. I think that's
so let 20 years just happen. What do you mean by that?
Meaning, like, if someone says, hey, it's going to take 20 years, I feel like a lot of people would say, it's like, hey, you got 3 weeks to write the paper. You don't start writing the paper that night. You're like, screw it. I got 3 weeks. I'll do it, on 2 weeks and 5 days. Where it's like, if someone says, hey, you got 20, it's going to be 20 years until you build that massive house. Most people are going to be like, all right, I'm just going to screw around for the next 18 years and then I'll get my shit together and build that massive house in 20 years. Where it's like, my mindset is, when it came to schoolwork, for the record, I did not. I did it on the last night. But with respect to this, I'm fine if it takes me 20 years to get there, but I'm going to act as though I can get it tomorrow. I'm going to work as quickly as I can and try to navigate my way to that level.
But how do we instill to people that watch videos and to watch social media posts that the only way you speed that up is by being able to comprehend each in particular part of the build? And sometimes you can't fast forward that. It literally takes time for each person. It could be 10 years, depending on who they're exposed to and what builds they're exposed to.
Sure.
And others, it won't. And I don't know. I threw 20 years out there because, Ted has a much broader time frame that I was more accustomed to when I grew up. And I still don't think, I said this to Benny today, I would love to up our number. Everyone's talking, up your numbers. And at a point where I don't know if I'm comfortable upping my numbers because my team's not that well polished yet for people to pay that number. And I don't think a lot of people have that moral obligation to the build or the client to say that. I'm not saying I'm putting myself on a pedestal, but I think people will pay whatever it is. And now this is like a stock exchange. It's just raise the number up, pay whatever it is, because otherwise you just don't get it. Mm-hmm. And I just, at that point, I don't know if craftsmanship's even in the equation, is it?
Yeah. But I think you would all agree with this, that, whatever your ambition is, there actually is no mountaintop to put a flag on.
Very true. Yeah.
There's only a path, and it's the path that you get on that's worth it. And where, however far you get, or, wherever you're going, there's something else beyond that. There's another thing.
There always is.
and so that doesn't stop after 50 years. It's actually the same thing as the first year. And so that creates, a whole lot of humility as well. And, anybody in this trade, you asked about a master craftsman. All the master craftsmen I know are incredibly humble, because humility comes with it too. If you've done all of that, you also know, what you don't know, as well as what you know. And
all the failures it took to get to that success.
Craftsmen are incredibly humble. I would add that. Hey, I'm glad you brought up This Old House, because I think they, definitely have contributed a lot, over the years, in educating and inspiring. I know the whole crew really well, and proud to have worked with them, and even built part of Norm Abrams' house. He worked right here in this shop. with us, on that project. And they're just really, really good people. Good craftsmen, good talent, good people. And I think they've added a lot. I learned last year, Matt Reisinger was visiting us, and he told me that one of his inspirations when he was young was an episode of This Old House that I was on.
Really?
Crazy.
And he remembered it. He remembered it enough that he could tell me what episode it was. And and so, what a service, This Old House has given to the industry, over all the years. I'm proud to have been associated with them, on a number of occasions. They're a good group, and I'm glad you've been able to grab them as a part of your podcast.
Yeah, there's a lot of people I've met in this industry that have disappointed me when you meet them, and they were not that. Yep. Like there's so many people that whether it's, I won't even say in this industry, let's just say in general, like I met an NHL player and I was always like, oh, this is awesome. And then they just let you down for whatever reason. And never once has anyone in that entire crew ever let me down. And it's more like I said to one of my interns that came with us to the Brookline, that was an open house. They just asked us to come down, and my guys see me pretty solid all the time. Like, just if you need something, I'm the guy to turn to. There's, pretty just level. And I remember I walked down, it was actually Ethan at the time, we're walking down and, I see Kevin and I see Tom through the window and Norm's hanging out there. And I turned to him, I go, this is me nervous. And I was all like jittery, and like 40-something-year-old dude still to this day will walk anywhere near that crew and the truck and all that and just get jittery again. And it's, I chalk them up to me being in this industry. That's what my initial exposure was to it. It wasn't the sawdust, the smell of it yet, but that's what got me to the job site or the tailgate for that interview. It was that production.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know how difficult it is for those guys, Tommy and Norm and Kevin, maybe especially, to be authentic. They're on TV a lot, and there's a lot about that is inherently not authentic. You just, take one, take two, take three, take four, I've been a part of that too. So that's, less than authentic, but they are. At the end of the day, they are real. They are legitimate craftspeople and, really, really, really talented and smart and committed. So
yeah, especially once you get into that industry and you're taking advertisements from vendors and there's people looking to market themselves through what you're doing, it's so hard to kind of stand your ground and stick to your roots. And they've always done a good, they don't stand behind products that they don't believe in. They don't endorse people or products that they don't believe in. And it's not necessarily about that big ticket number, the flash. It's more about being authentic, even when it goes down to like getting the money to fund everything. They only want to be involved with people that they believe in, products they believe in. And that's definitely not common today with most people, but it's most certainly in the entertainment industry. Make as much money as you can, take whatever you can, which I think I feel we've tried to do that as much as possible and keep what we're doing as authentic as possible, and not just take money from vendors and sponsorships from whoever. I think it's important, and I do believe viewership can see through that a lot of times, which I think that's something that we took from them for sure.
Yeah.
Which is it's I know something that we've always stood behind and kind of believed in as well.
Hands down.
Well, I want to thank you guys for the work you're doing and your commitment to spreading the news and lifting the craft.
Well, thanks. I think we have a few more years left in us. Not quite there yet. It's tough, but even just listening to your story and understanding what's within our control. And I think it's very easy to get down on the entire industry and the state of things. And I don't think that that's necessarily the right outlook all the time. I think there's certain things in our lives, in our industry, that we can control. And I think it's our job and our duty to really focus on those things and let go of the things that are outside of our control. And I think that that's where our impact is going to be, whether it's through work, through social media, through the podcast. To spend a ton of time harping on what it was, what it could be, it's not really going to get us anywhere. And I think it's going to kind of bring everyone's spirits down. So I think it is important in seeing what you did and what you could control and what you could give back to the industry and how you could make your impact, and not worrying about how you couldn't, is definitely a good lesson to be learned.
Totally agree.
Ted, I want to go back to Unity Homes, but before we do, I want to kind of dig into what timber framing has changed, or what timber framing evolved into, and that's the passive house. How long have you been involved with the passive house construction, and what does that really mean to you? Because I know that's really important to what you guys do today.
Yeah, let's talk about it in relation to the passive house principles.
Yeah,
and not necessarily, the certified passive house, which we have done, but we don't do certified passive house on a regular basis. So we think of it more about high performance building and applying, those really important principles to make buildings, tighter, better insulated, better ventilation, good air quality, good efficiency. That is, really important to what we're trying to achieve. But I want to make a point about it, that it's not new to us. It actually started at the beginning in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't remember or weren't there or haven't read your history, in the 1970s, there were two huge energy crises, 1973 and 1979. And it was a big thing worldwide at the time. You couldn't get gasoline. Cars were lined up for miles to get gasoline. And, there was this recognition that, fossil fuels are finite and we're likely not going to be able to provide energy through that fossil fuel source. And it was a worldwide awakening, not just, in this country. But, there we were, trying to revive timber framing, as a building method in the middle of, those energy crises. And so, I recognized pretty early on that if timber framing was going to be viable, it had to be really super efficient, energy efficient, and better than the conventional alternative. And long story short, and you can read about this in my first couple of books, we were also a part of developing and establishing the idea of what we called back then stress skin panels. They call them SIPs now, structural insulated panels. But we were the first to use them. I put them on buildings in 1977 after having tested them right over here in this shop. And, we glued them up, a friend of mine and I, making a SIP with glue and bun stock, and lo and behold, a year or so later, we were enclosing a building, wrapping a timber frame, with SIPs as a method. And the whole idea was the same, to make it, airtight, super insulated, get rid of thermal bridging, so that you're not losing energy, through structural members. SIPs did that really well. And so our early timber frames from 77, 78, through the 80s, we're really kind of establishing an industry standard of energy efficiency. It was hard for stick buildings to compete with that as a method. So, so we stuck with that for a lot of years, but we kind of went through it. There were issues around SIPs that, particularly kind of the material waste and the foam aspect of the product, that we decided that we wanted to overcome. And that led to us developing our own, insulation method that we're using now. But, based on the same principles of, getting rid of, thermal bridging, as an issue, and ensuring that the enclosure is airtight, and therefore you have mechanical ventilation and better fresh air and better air quality. So it's actually been a part of our company story from the beginning. But, more lately, it's become a bit more of a focus. The Unity buildings, only one of the platform options has it kind of a critical part of it has a timber frame in it. It's the trad model. The others have a timber structure inside, but it's not a timber frame. It's more just an internal structure as a substitute for partitions, to support the building internally. But the real focus is energy efficiency. So all of the Unity homes don't rely on fossil fuels at all. And, we're using heat pumps, typically. And that allows you to get to net zero because it's all electric, and you can heat and cool and provide all the plug loads typically, with a relatively small solar array. And so our energy efficiency as a company has, gone forward, since the late 1970s. But we've always been on the same track, just, more of a focus on that today than at the beginning. And then on the Benson Wood side, we've established a new brand that we're calling Open Home. And we're partnering with several architects like Flato and Karen Timberlakes in that Open Home platform. And that's kind of for the other end of the market. It's a high-end offering. And at that high-end offering, we do want to go to the Passive House level, Passive House certified level. So kind of upping the energy efficiency and the overall building performance. So for that market that can afford a little more, we said, well, then you can afford a little more, good building quality as well, good air quality and energy efficiency. So we've embedded that in that product.
So with respect to that, right, I think that this is the often difficult thing to bridge is how do you take a product that is superior? Like you're talking about two totally different ends of the market. Something that is obtainable by the majority and then something that is not obtainable, but still be able to bridge this gap. And John, you made the reference to like Artisan Homes, like how he can scale back things. He's building, multi-million-dollar homes and then can peel that back to under $1 million. So for you, Ted, what is it a multitude of things, or is it one thing that you're looking at specifically where it's like, all right, listen, this is for the masses. This is, we can bring it to this. But if someone wants to pay the premium, all right, we have a product for that. And this is the difference between it.
Yeah. The important thing is to think about it as a symbiotic relationship. That, on one side with Unity Homes, it's really important that we achieve, not just the energy efficiency and that performance on a regular basis, which we are, but that we make it affordable. So a lot of it is about efficiency and production and repetition and iteration. Mm-hmm. That's the important thing that's happening with Unity to make it ever more, affordable while keeping the quality up. And at the other end, we can do a lot more innovation and, try things and kind of push the boundaries. And so that cost efficiency isn't critical, but kind of pushing pushing the extremes on the other end is critical. The way I generally describe it is Unity, on the Unity side, we're optimizing all the qualities. And on the Benson wood, we're maximizing, all the qualities. And the maximizing can lead to something that can be optimized. And that's actually how we got there to begin with, so that we can develop something, on the maximized side that we can say, all right, that looks like a really good value. Maybe it's a stairway,
Sure.
Could be a stairway, could be anything. But once it was developed, you say, that's pretty cool. I think we can iterate that and make that more affordable. And so that symbiotic relationship between those two sides is actually critical. If we had only Unity and it was always, the affordable, it would be hard to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to develop.
I think that's important. And I think that's kind of what I was trying to get to, is like that, being able to take something that you do, and then, like you said, you worded it far better than I ever could, is you're basically taking something, you're doing it for the first time, and then looking at that, and is there a way to optimize it? How do you make it repetitive? How do you systemize it? And, because oftentimes people are like, the only way to build something, less expensively is to do a crappier job at it or lessen the quality. And it's like, you just don't want, like, you don't want to do that. You don't want to communicate. You don't want to say that. Number one, you don't want to brand, you don't want to stand behind it as a brand, and I think looking at it as you're either being innovative or you're optimizing and being, more efficient. I think you said something along the lines of being more cost efficient, where it's like you're looking at ways to systemize things and stream and really just, do it in a systemized way.
Right. So that brings up something, and this is probably a longer topic. So I'm going to tease you and say we should do a future podcast about this other topic.
All right. I'll schedule you for
tomorrow
next week.
night, same time. Let's go back to back.
But, in Unity homes, and I think I mentioned this before, but in Unity homes, everything is standardized. And
what does that mean for you?
That is really missing in our industry.
What does standardized mean for you?
Standardized means that we have established a method of dimensioning and positioning so that everything can fit, and we can establish libraries of things,
like Legos,
and a rationale for things that can be repeated. So, just to kind of explain it in a nutshell, we have a macro grid that controls the building structure, and the macro grid has positional power and dimensional power. And so all buildings, have a rational dimension, and the footprint of the building is something you can know and repeat and understand. And what it means is anything you put into that building that's on the same grid can be repeated. Whether it's a floor plan or a bathroom or a stairway or a thing, or even the placement of an outlet, everything has a position or a dimension. So that's the structure of the building. Then the infill of the building is on a microgrid. And the microgrid and the macro grid overlap, obviously. But everything has a rationale for where it goes, what its size should be, what its location should be. There's a rationale for it. And that's what allows us in our design and engineering to compose or assemble in design the building instead of draw it, right? You're assembling the components and creating a unique custom building every time. So it's incredibly powerful and missing in our industry. But, this computer that you guys are looking at and I'm looking at, everything in there is standardized. Every bit of it. That keyboard you're looking at, that monitor you're looking at, everything is standardized. And it allows, your manufacturer to actually get their parts from, a whole bunch of suppliers. They don't make all those things. They're made by suppliers because the whole industry is standardized. Same with my bicycles. There's like half a dozen things on a bicycle that are standardized. Therefore, all sorts of parts are interchangeable. I can upgrade my saddle and, get a new derailleur, and, everything fits because there's standardization. Our industry has no standardization, nothing. And well, there's a few things. Interior doors have a standardization that I think we could repeat to each other. Kitchen cabinets, that industry has a little bit of standardization, but the industry as a whole has none. And, I think, when I'm gone, the legacy that we may have left for the industry is a standardized system, maybe the biggest thing. So on the maximized side, on Open Home, we do the same thing. We use the same macro grid, we use the same microgrid, we use the same dimensions because the market doesn't care, right? That part can be more affordable, that part can be more expensive, that could be, a custom crafted stairway or a manufactured stairway based on the same, logical standard dimensions. So that's actually the secret behind, our whole company at this point is that standardization, which allows things like, libraries of kitchens and bathrooms and, stairways and floor plans and parts of floor plans and patterns. And, all of that is actually, pretty powerful because it means that nearly everything we do iterates, right? It's not a thing we just did that time. We iterate it because it exists as a thing, with a standard. So we, that kitchen could improve because we're iterating it. It's not, we can always upgrade it and evolve it. But you can't do that if every time you're developing new dimensions and,
right,
new things. How do you iterate?
When you say macro grid and micro grid, are we talking a computer program that, as you manipulate this, it's automatically adjusting things? Am I thinking of this too technically?
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother topic about computer programs that can do all that.
Right.
But the way we're practicing it, we practice it without the automation of a program. We're developing that program, but you don't need that program.
Right.
And just so that you can envision it, the macro grid is basically 2 feet and the micro grid is basically 3 inches. But all the increments in between and beyond are available too. So it could be 4 feet, 2 feet, 1 foot, 6 inches, 3 inches, 1.5 inches, 3/4. But the whole point is you're somewhere, there's a logic.
Yeah. The reason I had asked that is I'm going to probably screw this up, but a local architect, young kid, he's very computer, I'll give him a shout out, Ryan Pinkham. He's, it's very much like computer generated. He works through a lot of software and it's really interesting to me. And I can't remember the plugin for his program. I want to say it's called Grasshopper.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So the other day he posted on Instagram this photo of essentially, it looked like a wiring diagram up on his screen. And he wrote hashtag, "This is architecture." And I had the ability to see it. He brought it here at the office. And that's what it really is it's basically you build something and then this wiring diagram, I have no idea how this works, so I'm butchering this, but this wiring diagram basically says that as you manipulate a portion of that, the rest of the model is manipulated according to that. And it's just, it's wild. And and he's very much into the automation and, planning and putting together these processes to make things more efficient. It's something that he's really passionate about. And that's why I'd asked if it was a computer program, and it sounds like you guys are developing that, because I agree. I think our industry, there is no standardization, and thus, costs go up and up and up and up and up and up, and everything gets more expensive. And there'll always be costs to this industry, and, product and things like that. But I do think that we spend an enormous amount of time, and I would say waste an enormous amount of time on rethinking the process through, when, there's been opportunities, even here in my company. It's like we get these projects that are budget driven, and we look, and I look at it and I'm like, I don't care what we have to do. Like, I know that house can be built for $850,000, but how do we get there? And the only way to do, sorry,
because I could do it.
But well,
that's how
it's not even that. It's just the fact that it's like, when we look at things and what things cost, it's because we're doing it for the first time, and it takes all of this thought that, like, everything becomes expensive because there's so much thought that goes into it that takes a lot of time, where it's
or experience.
Yeah, experience.
Wait for that to come along.
What's that?
Or you wait for that to come along.
I mean, even from like a pricing perspective, every time that you price something, you don't have a standard bathroom size. You don't have a standard kitchen size. So every time that you look at something, it's it's a bathroom on the second floor of the house rather than the first floor of the house. There's a different set of circumstances for every single job that we do in our industry. And we don't really have an opportunity. I mean, we do, but in our existing situation, we don't have an opportunity to really control that as you do, Ted. You're controlling that so that, you're basically repeating these tasks over and over again and becoming more and more efficient, creating less waste, and then coming up with different potential options based on those set of points and circumstances and conditions. Which, like, I mean, we just had this conversation, was it John, last week, about like trying to, there's no distinguishable point even in any job that we do where like we get done a task and then we hand it off to somebody else and it's a clean transition, where like there's always an overlap with what we do and multiple trades being involved and then working around something that we didn't plan for, or a remodel, where if you set up in a manner where like, I'm sure in your shop, Ted, that everyone has a duty and they know what their duty is. And you don't have the one guy whose job is to be running the CNC over fitting parts, because that's just not his job. Like, there's not an overlap there. You can train somebody to do one specific task, and it's really tough to do that in our industry, being that there's no standardization.
Yeah. And with some standardization, even of the tasks themselves, you really can train people to do a lot of things. That really kind of broadens the horizon so that people don't have to do the same thing every day. And it doesn't make sense, for them to do the same thing every day. So people moving around and going from task to task is really, really pretty important for learning, for, keeping people active and involved. So we don't stick people on any particular task, and it doesn't make sense. But part of the reason we can do that is a lot of the tasks are repeatable and therefore pretty trainable. So you'll be doing this for a day or 2 days and moving on. And then, with that kind of cross training, you come up with good ideas. If you have 15 or 20 people doing that task, it's likely it'll get improved more than if one person was doing it.
For sure. It's just like a different set of eyes on things.
Yeah. Exactly.
Am I wrong to say that I think the only standardization that there is in the industry is it's implemented individually? Meaning it takes me years to, I think this was what everyone talked about in the beginning, is that, the older generation won't adapt to new technology because they have their way. If it's building a certain way, they don't do trusses. They do 2x10s because that's what they've had forever. They do CDX plywood and don't go to zip, because it's their standardization. This is what they've known for decades not to fail. And then I think when you guys were all talking about that, I'm like, I think there's a portion of what I do that is a standardization for me. And then after that, like, I can take my standards and adapt it to whatever design that comes my way. If it's a different architect, I take that and then I ask if I can supplement in this product for whatever reason. But I think it starts with having your own standard of how you want to build, and I think, Ted, I think you've evolved that, meaning you've started with the timber frame and you've not, I don't want to say perfected that because that's just really tough to do, but I think you've accomplished what you needed there. And then you've evolved enough that then you can open your eyes to something else, because I think what happens in this industry is it is very overwhelming, whether it's a renovation or a new construction build, is that if you look at the big picture, it's like a tidal wave that comes over you. But if you can look at stuff and make it a system that's your own, that you then don't have to be so scared of everything. Meaning, hey, like my envelope, I know what my envelope is. Everyone sees it on social media. I do the Marvin Windows zip system, and then I do closed cell foam. That's my happy place. I don't care what the shape is. I don't care what it has to be. If the shape becomes more intricate, I know where to focus my efforts onto it, because the nuts and bolts of the whole thing is dialed in. Like, I know where I need to focus, but without those standards for myself, then everything's overwhelming from foundation all the way through. So Tyler, I totally agree with you that there's curveballs that come at us, but without understanding and the experience of how do I get through the whole thing and understand it, where that way I can feel comfortable going forward. Otherwise, those curveballs, everything's a curveball. The true thing about the experience is learn how to hit the curve.
No, I mean, for sure. And that's just putting your time in and going through and making the mistakes and seeing all of those situations kind of come to fruition and experiencing them. I think that's part of being in this industry and just seeing and experience life working in homes, building homes. It's that being said, there's really, like you said, other than doors, other than a lot of people building ceilings at 8 feet, there's not a lot of standards that
they're minimum standards.
Yeah, everyone has their own. Each architect has their own. Each builder has their own. No, there's not an industry standard or like a baseline for everyone where they're like, hey, we're going to price this job out. Here's the baseline for it. And then you can tweak it from there. There's nothing, which makes it very difficult. You don't ever know what you're going to get. Bring a subcontractor in, bring 2 floor guys, you just never know what you're going to get. It's tough.
It's a problem.
It is.
Yeah.
Ted, do you think that this idea, this epiphany, it's more necessary now because of lack of trades and skilled craftsmen, that what you're coming up with right now is actually so much more important than it was 20 years ago? Because now you're simplifying a system so more people can adapt quicker and then be able to focus on the cool stuff. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. Right. But even right back to the architects, so that we're more designing on a standard, and then, that standard can come all the way back to your building system, right? Yeah. So your zip and, what'd you say, Marvin Windows?
Marvin Windows, closed cell phone, Simpson doors. I know it takes a lot for someone to say, hey, I want to substitute that. It's like, you know what? You can't. I'm like the Chinese food restaurant. No substitutions.
Yeah. But your system could adapt to a dimensional standard. Easy.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
But I love that, because to Nick's point is that it may have taken me 15 years to get there. Now you've shrunk that gap to 5.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. You should write another book.
Going up on our deadline.
I still work.
I got mine on my notes in my phone, all my chapters. If I lose my phone, I'm done.
Should be backing that up, John.
It's on the cloud, right? I don't know where to get it.
I sure hope so.
Right with our last podcast we recorded.
Very true, Tyler.
Ted, we're respectful of your time and appreciate you being on so late with us tonight. We will absolutely take you up on the offer for a second podcast, and hopefully real soon be able to take a ride up to the shop, and that's really see it. You know, I've had the ability to chat with some of your guys about projects and, you know, and understanding the process in which you guys take. And I'm excited even just to understand it more and learn more about it, and to hear you talking about standardizing and creating systems to, you know, leave as your legacy beyond what you've already built. That's pretty impressive. And I think the entire industry can, you know, I speak for the entire industry when I say thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you guys. And do come. Just not now.
That was the only time you had a straight face the entire
I know. He's been smiling the whole time. And then he's like, not now.
Not now.
You let us know when we're welcome, and we will make the trip up.
Yeah, great. Yeah, let's just beat this COVID thing and get back to real life, huh?
I'm with you. Dude, I feel like we could have went 5 hours on this one.
You could add him to legendary status.
Yeah, that was pretty awesome.
He's all the way up there. I almost teared up at one point.
Which part?
But just when he's talking about homes, like what the impact they have. And I think I hope more people get infected with his vision.
He has a really, you know, good way of explaining it, you know, like just walking through, you know, the reason he's done things, the reason, you know, I didn't realize that it was day one. Like that was wild. That's
amazing,
you know, but it's just, I don't know. It's just super interesting. And I think he's already brought a ton of value to the industry, and for him,
he's made a huge impact. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I drove out to New York probably. I was looking it up because I didn't know if we'd have time. I went to his first passive house he ever built in New York. And I drove all the way out there just to walk it for like a half hour. It was getting built, and it was the thing. I was at Boston Green Building, and it was in the New York Times. It put, you know, passive house on the map for like, it's actually happening, and it's happening in real life. Come see it. So I think either my boss at the time contacted him, and we went out there. I didn't meet him on site because they were putting it together, but it was the coolest thing to see the R values that it looked like it's from a different planet. Like I remember the basement door was a refrigerator, a freezer door, like just for air sealing. And I was like, what the heck? Like the doors I'm putting in from Home Depot, it's like a different level. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely up. I think he's up there with Tommy Silva.
Yeah. I was fully expecting to hop on Amazon and his book be like $500, but it's reasonably priced, under $20. I went to
eBay for an old one. Trying to find one that's all tattered.
We got a few reviews this week, or at least one, and it looks like my groom and I are gearing up to build a forever home build in Massachusetts. It's no high-end build, but it ain't chump change either. Goes on to, we're using the podcast to help and others to help us choose what we really want to spend, where we really want to spend our money. That's cool. I think it's cool to have a homeowner kind of chime in here.
That is cool.
But I was just checking out who we have next week. We have Aaron from Hummingbird Hill Homes.
Oh, I like these guys.
Yeah, he wants to talk about panelization and carbon sequestering with, I said that terribly, using mass timber, health and wellness, fusing traditional craftsmanship and sustainability. So I think we're on this little, technologically advanced building practices.
These guys are killing it, though. If you follow them on social, between their branding and their execution, some people have one and not the other. And sometimes they're not in order. But these guys have it dialed in. I've been following them for a while, and I'm pumped that they're able to jump on. So it's really cool. I think like they just look at it from a different thing. It's like instead of building like quality, they like, I think it's thrive. We build buildings that thrive, and that's really cool because it's beyond just comfort and that stuff. It's something that I think is unique, and I'd love to hear their story.
Cool. We'll see those guys next week. You guys know where to find us. If you want to give us some feedback, there's a Survey Monkey on our Instagram. Make sure you drop us a 5-star in iTunes. Keep us in the #1 spot for this industry podcast. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by Duration Moulding and Millwork. Let's talk sustainability. How about a product that uses waste from coal production and turns into siding and moldings that meet the tough standards of historical architectural review boards? And because it's so durable, you won't have to be worrying about replacing it. Do the right thing for the environment, your client, and your reputation. And to learn more about Duration Polyash products, please visit their website at durationmillwork.com.